let's make sure we're still filming. We are still filming.
There are no pillowcases in here! Why did I do that?
Hello everyone, welcome to my top 8 books of 2022. This is basically just going to be a pretty chill video of me just like detailing my top 8 books of the last year. I don't remember exactly how many books I read over the last year. I know that it was a pretty substantial amount, but I am not 100% sure how many books it was. The top 8 of the books that I know I read last year, and we're just going to talk about them, and I'm going to go through them. I'm going to give you my thoughts. I'm going to give you the rundown as to why these books were my favorite. We've got 8 books of pretty varying genres, I would say. And we're just going to go through them. We're going to talk about them. I'm going to talk about what I liked. I'm going to talk about what I didn't like. I'm going to talk about all of the things that have to do with these 8 books. So if you are interested in any of the books that you saw in the thumbnail or any of the books that you will currently look in the description and find, because I am going to put links to where you can find all these books on Amazon, stick around and let's hop into it. So, in the first book that I read of 2022, this was literally the first book that I read last year. It is Note to Self by Connor Franta. I read this book in 2017, and I was very young in 2017, and the only thing I really knew about this book was that it was written by Connor Franta, and Connor Franta is a YouTuber, if you don't know who he is, and he was one of my favorite YouTubers at the time. So I was like, oh my god, I need to get his book. Like, he released a book, I need to get it. So I asked for it for Christmas, and I got it for Christmas, and I read it in like a couple days. That was like my first reading venture, was like reading Note to Self. And so I read it in a couple days, and I loved it. I knew that I loved it at that time, but until last year, I didn't really understand why. This book is just so interesting to me, because it's a collection of photography, biography, and poetry. And it's just all intermingled with one another, and it all kind of tells the tales of his life and his struggles, like growing up and moving to LA and pursuing video making and all of these kinds of things, and then starting to become a writer. And it's kind of, it talks about his experiences in life and his experiences as a person, and kind of him growing into himself. The little blurb on the back says, "This is an open diary. This gives my insides a voice through visuals and poetry. This is me spilled out on paper." And I would wholeheartedly agree with that. This book is very much about Connor. I saw a bunch of my own life reflected in this when I was reading it, but for the most part, this details his life story, which I felt was really interesting, specifically for me, because I am a fan of his, and it was really nice for me to get to see into his life a little bit more. And also just because like the aesthetic of this book is just so beautiful, and so I like flew through it. I absolutely flew through it. I read this so quickly last year. And like I said, it's just such an interesting collection of different mediums of storytelling. He's got a bunch of really, really good stories in here just about like general life itself. But like I said, most of it relies on the fact that this is his life that he's telling the stories about, except for in the poetry. The poetry is a little more vague, but the rest of it is just like biographical stories, which I thought was really interesting. So, if you like a good biography and you know anything about Connor Franta, I would highly recommend picking this one up. The second book that we have here is House Fires by Connor Franta. This is the third book that he's written. The first one I actually do not have. It's called A Work in Progress, and it was like its own memoir, its own standalone memoir. But this is the second installment of these kind of like photography, writing, poetry books, except this one relies a lot less on his story and more of like a philosophical view of the world and like people's place in the world. And I thought it was really interesting to get to read his take on it. He's in his late 20s now, and so he obviously knows much more than he did when he wrote that book. This came out in 2021, the Note to Self came out in 2017, like I said, so there's about a 4-year difference here, assuming he wrote them in the same relative time to when he released them. But this one, like I said, is a lot more philosophical. It's a lot more about like mental health and people's place in the world, and just how we're all here existing together. But there's also definitely a touch of his own stories in here, which is very interesting. So there's a lot of like grand scale, like, do I even matter? Is life even important? We're literally on a rock floating in space. And then there's also like this boy that I was texting just dumped me and I'm really sad about it. So this is a pretty good mix of like vibes, I guess. And he's pretty humorous with some of the stuff that he writes in here. But this one just to me feels, I gave it a 5 out of 5 on Goodreads. It's very vibrant, it's very powerful, and it really made me think about my life. So again, if you're interested in franta, which maybe you are, maybe you aren't, he's a pretty prominent YouTuber, at least he was. He's not so much anymore. I definitely still watch his stuff though. If you're interested in franta, or if you're interested in any book that is formatted in this way, I highly recommend that you pick this up because it's fantastic. And I really, really loved it. So something fun about this book as well is that the very back of it has the last poem of the book. And he says, I'm thankful for it all, really, the pain and the pleasure, all the quiet joys and loud despairs, the rosy peaks and the indigo valleys. I love that line. I've been shaped by every second of every minute, constructed into a chronicle, refined by my own autonomy, born to never occur again. But watch me bleed until the sun sets. I love it. I love it so much. I love that the idea of your whole life just being put down into this little concrete thing is just so, like, the idea of having someone's life packaged into this little square, and it's just so colorful and it's so full of nuance and experience and everything. Like, God, it's just so cool. I just love it so much. So definitely pick these two up, or at least one of these two. And if you're only going to pick up one, I highly recommend that you pick up House Fires. The third book on my top 8 of 2022 was Bethan Roberts' My Policeman. So if anybody knows anything about me, they know that Harry Styles is a part of my personality. I have an entire sector on my, like, oh, I lost a photo. I have like an entire sector on my photo wall over there dedicated to Harry Styles and the 2 Harry Styles concerts that I've been to. And so back in 2020, fall of 2020, when I found out that he was going to be in the movie adaptation of this book, I literally flipped my lid. I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, he's going to play a closeted gay policeman. Like, I need to find the book. I need to read this book. And initially, I only picked this book up because I wanted to have an understanding of the story and like its nuance going into the movie, just to see if they would pick up on all of the hidden gems and all the hidden things that are in this book. Obviously, they didn't, because movie adaptations usually lack a bunch of the stuff that's in the book. However, I fell in love with this book after reading it. I think it's so beautifully written. If you don't know what the story is about, it's about this policeman named Tom who gets engaged to this school teacher named Marion while also falling in love with a museum curator at the Brighton Museum named Patrick. So what happens is that Tom and Patrick are meeting and they're in love in secret while Tom is married to Marion in public, and the 3 of them kind of build this relationship where Marion and Patrick become friends, and then they also start to resent each other after their secret relationship comes out at some point. Obviously, that's written in the description of the book. So they kind of just have to find this balance of sharing Tom, I guess, and trying to find a way for this to work in 1950s Brighton. And obviously it doesn't, because gay people can't ever be happy in literature or film. So it's just a really interesting story about like the power of love and the power of friendship. And honestly, just the power of like human connection. I think it's really, really interesting. It's very evocative. So if you're interested in something like this, be sure to pick up this one up. It was pretty good. I'm quite glad. It was also one of the first books that I started to like tab. So there's some tabs in here from some of my favorite pages, but where's the one? I want to find the quote. Yeah, I really was annotating it as I was going through that. I forgot about that. Where is it? Yes! Oh my God, here it is. I did mark it and I just didn't see it. This is my favorite quote from this book. I just spent so long looking for it. He says, "Let's come back when the sun's out, when it's warm, then we'll swim together." And then Tom says, "But I like it like this, just us in the fog." And then Patrick laughs and he said, "For a policeman, you're very romantic." And Tom says, "For an artist, you're very afraid." I love that. I love that so much. I love that line. Anyways, we have to move on. So, the next book on my list actually 100% came from Book Talk, and then I ordered it from Book of the Month because I have a Book of the Month subscription, but it is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I truly was not a huge fantasy fan when I went into this book, which is why I was pretty nervous about reading it, because I was like, I don't really love fantasy. Like, I don't read a ton of fantasy. I usually read like either romance or fiction or like contemporary fiction. Not a lot of fantasy. However, this has changed my mind, and now I'm super interested in fantasy. I have a ton of fantasy on my shelves because of this book. This book details a girl named Addie LaRue. In the 1700s in France, she makes a deal with the devil that she wants to live forever. And the devil's like, okay, slay, you can live forever. However, every single person that you meet between now and forever will immediately forget you once you're out of their line of sight. So like, she could say hi to someone in a grocery store, and the second that person goes into a different aisle that she's not in, they're gonna forget all about her. So she's never able to make any connections, and she has to live forever. So she just lives this life that nobody remembers, and she's 17, 300 years later. All of a sudden, she's in a bookstore in, I think it's New York City? Yeah, it's New York City, I'm pretty sure. She goes into this hidden bookstore and she meets a boy who remembers her. And this just kind of, it's like two parallel timelines about her from the point of making the deal and then discovering and experiencing her life up until she meets this boy, kind of. And then from when she meets the boy forward. So we're kind of jumping through two different time periods that are moving in parallel with one another. It's very interesting. It's very cool. This world that Schwab creates is so magical, and you learn to really love Addie. She's just like this explorative, is that a word? I don't know. Explorative young girl who's just very interested in the world around her. And she's also super sad and lonely, and you really start to feel for her. It is a page turner. There were some pacing issues that I had with it, if we're going to be totally frank. I think I gave this one a 4 stars just because of the pacing issues. There are some times when they get super, super bogged down on the stuff that happens in the past, and yes, some of it does end up being important, but there are just a lot of details in here that, like, sometimes it did make it a little bit harder to read. But if you like focusing on the details of books, this is definitely a book for you. And I still chose to include this book in this video because it genuinely is such an amazing book, besides just being a little more drawn out than I would have liked. But I have no problem with reading a long book, as we will soon find out. So 4 stars for The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Definitely pick this up if you haven't already been swayed by the land of book talk. The next book on my list I actually read in 2021, and then I reread it last year. It's Call Me By Your Name by André. This is not my favorite book I've ever read. However, this is my favorite movie of all time. Not necessarily for the plot. I do think that some of the aspects of the plot are very, very interesting, and I think the fact that, spoilers ahead, that Elio and Oliver don't end up together in the end is very important in just realizing that you don't have to have an outcome to be happy with the experience of a relationship, and to just experience someone's presence and your time together is sometimes way more valuable than having a long-term relationship with that person, even though that's something that you both would have really liked. We're ignoring the age gap for the sake of this video and for the sake of everything I have to do talking about Call Me By Your Name. I pretend that they are both 23 and 24, but a 17-year-old Elio Proman falls in love with this doctorate transfer student in their Italian home. He's an American. He enters his family's Italian home, Elio's family's Italian summer villa. His name is Oliver. And then Elio and Oliver kind of go on this experience together where they, like, fall in love. And I think it's an amazing tale, like I was saying earlier, of just people experiencing life with other people. I think it's so, so interesting, and I love it. I really do. This is not necessarily one of my favorite books, but it does have a really special place in my heart because of the movie and because of the way that the director of that movie, his name is Luca Guadagnino, I don't know how to pronounce his name. But it is my favorite movie of all time because, like, the aesthetic, the music, the way that it's shot, the acting, like, everything is glorious. So I read this book again last year, getting back into it, and I still love it just as much as I did the first time. I give this one 4.5 stars out of 5. Still one of my favorite books that I read last year. All right, we're getting into the nitty-gritty here. We've only got 3 books left. So my third to last book is Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Malinda Lo. This was one of my favorite books of 2022. I can definitely see this becoming a book that I will revisit again in the future once I've had some more time to sit on it. I actually ended up reading this for a school assignment last year. We had to do like an independent novel study, and I did mine at Last Night at the Telegraph Club. This is a book essentially about the struggle of being a closeted lesbian in the 1950s, especially because our main character, her name is Lily. She's a Chinese American, and her family is at risk of being deported while she's also trying to deal with the fact that she is in love with a girl named Kathleen in her class. And she's trying to deal with how it feels to be a growing teenager in a society that doesn't necessarily want to accept you. You have many different layers of struggle. You've got family issues, you've got not fitting in, you've got being gay, you've got being a Chinese American. The country doesn't necessarily want you there, your school doesn't want you there, your family doesn't want you there. This is the story of how Lily gets through all of it, and I really think that Malinda paints a beautiful picture of how Lily ends up, like, I fell in love with this main character. It's such an amazing story of like perseverance and love and self-acceptance and like hope for the future and how far we've come since the 1950s. Like, I find myself very lucky to be able to love and to be who I am. There are still some like bad apples, but it's not anything like it was. We can do this. Hopefully it's coming out of this mic. If it's not coming out of this mic, I might just freak out. Hello, everyone. Calm down. But y'all do not understand how much emotional turmoil this footage and this video have caused me. So I'm missing all of my Evelyn Hugo footage, which is fine, but I just have to re-record it. The second to last book in my top 8 of 2022 is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This book, like I was talking about with Addie LaRue, I kind of fell into like a book talk hole where I was just kind of like, okay, I'm letting all of my books get recommended to me by people who know reading better than I do. So I picked this one up because everyone was like, this book is so good, and it's a queer story, and it's about journalism, and I'm going into journalism, and I'm a queer person, so I was like, oh, this sounds super fun. I had heard great things about this book, and I was like, okay, let me just pick it up. I'm gonna read it on this vacation that I went on. When I tell you that I absolutely fell in love with this book, I fell in love with the character of Evelyn Hugo and the character of Monique. If you don't know what this story is about, Monique is a journalist who gets offered by Evelyn herself to interview her and like tell her life story to the public. And so Monique, along with the reader, are both going on these journeys of figuring out who Evelyn Hugo is as a person. And then you're also kind of paralleling that timeline with Monique's story and how her own life outside of just interviewing Evelyn is evolving and changing the more that she learns about Evelyn and who she is. You can see the impact that Evelyn has had on her life. And you fall in love with Monique. You absolutely fall in love with Evelyn and with all of the characters, well, not all, some of the characters that Evelyn comes in contact with. It is by far my favorite book that I read in 2022, and I didn't put it last for reasons that you will soon find out when you see what my last book is. But this book is impeccable. It's amazing. If you have not read it and you want to read it or you're thinking about reading it, definitely go pick it up. Taylor Jenkins Reid is like my favorite author because of this book. I just love it. I love that book so much. It will always have such a special place in my heart. But now it's time for the last book, so carry on. All right, and for the last book on my list, we have A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. But this book literally changed the way that I perceive so many things. It touches so deeply and so intelligently on love, friendship, relationships, trauma, the power of human connection, the power of friendship, mental illness, mental well-being overall, the pursuit of the American dream. This book follows 4 college boys. Their names are JB, Willem, Malcolm, and the enigmatic Jude, who is kind of the center of all of these friendships. He's very crippled. He's had a very hard life. He's got a lot of mental trauma, a lot of physical abuse trauma. There's a lot that is detailed in this And it is pretty heavy, so I would definitely, if you're thinking about reading it, I would definitely read the trigger warnings, because there were points when I was reading this that I had to put it down. But despite all of those things, this book is incredible. It's an amazing journey through how these 4 fictional men grew up, and the power of friendship. And like I said, human connection is like the biggest thing that I take away from this. How words and other people can save us from even like the worst times of our life, and how we can still move forward even though so many bad things may have happened to us. Literally one of the best books I've ever read in my entire life. I don't know that I'd ever read it again, just because it's so intense and it is so long. I think I'll definitely end up picking it back up at some point, but probably not anytime soon. I definitely need to sit on it a little while longer. This book is very intense, but it is so worth it. So if you're thinking about reading it and you've seen it, definitely pick it up. Again, look at a list of the trigger warnings. That's what I did. I was a little wary going in because I knew that it was going to be pretty intense, but it ended up paying off. The ending of the book is absolutely beautiful, and you really just fall in love with Jude. Like, God, I just want to protect him like a son. It also was a National Book Award finalist, if that helps you with anything. But yes, this is the final book on my list. 5 out of 5 stars, absolutely, hands down. Pick this book up. Like I said, the links will be in the description below if you want to check out any of these books. All right, that brings the first part of this video to a close. So the second part of this video, I'm just going to briefly talk about the 2 books that I've started in 2023. I've started 2 novels so far. One of them is a biography, one of them is a fantasy. And I'm just going to briefly talk about them and talk about my reading hopes and journeys for the future and all that kind of stuff. So the first book that I started reading, it's actually not the first book that I started reading this year. I started this today. This is Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. It's his biography, his autobiography. I'm on page 47, and I think it's really good. Obviously, Trevor Noah is a comedian, and so there's a lot of humor. But yes, this came out in 2019. It's very humorous, very funny so far, and I'm very invested in his past. I'm a big fan of Trevor Noah's, so this is super cool. The second book that I have started is one that I found because of one Haley Pham. I absolutely love her stuff. She's amazing. She's like one of my favorite like book-oriented YouTube channels. But this is the first book in the Folk of the Air. Is that the name of the series? I think it's the Folk of the Air series. It is. The Folk of the Air series. This is the first book. It's called The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I have heard such amazing things about this book. And I went to Barnes & Noble yesterday and I said, you know, I know that I got a lot of books for Christmas and I have a bunch of stuff to go through, but I have a feeling that I'm really going to like this one. And so I want to pick it up and I want to start reading it. And so far I have not only absolutely plowed through it, but I've loved it. Like I said, with Addie LaRue, I was never a big fantasy fan until I read that book. And this is fantasy, and it's also a straight enemies to lovers. It's also YA, which is super fun, but I'm on page 152, and I literally started it yesterday, and I read all this in like 1.5 sessions, so I'm super excited to keep reading this. I imagine I'll be done with this probably by the end of the week. Oh God, it's so good so far. It's so good. I love it. I love the storytelling, and this world that is created is just so amazing, and I love it, and I've absolutely that was probably so loud. And I've absolutely fallen in love with it. So, but apart from that, that is all I have for you for this video. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking around. This year I plan to do a bunch of stuff with reading, of course, and just like a bunch of other things. I've got kind of a plan set up for what I'm thinking about doing in the future in terms of like videos that I'm going to upload and like content that I want to end up creating. Still working on it, obviously. This is literally my 3rd video, on 2nd if we're not including the Smoky Diaries from last year. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I very much appreciate it, and I will see you when I see you. Bye!